In the warm, peaceful lands of Kijana village, the sun always rose over green fields, and laughter could be heard from far away. The people were simple and kind, and they worked together, sharing food, stories, and songs. Among them lived a man named Bako. He was a strong and hard-working man who owned many cattle and a large farm. People respected him because he helped others during the planting season and gave food to the poor when harvest came. But though he was known for his wealth and success, people often spoke about one thing that troubled his heart: his jealousy. Bako had a wife named Lela, a woman whose beauty was not just in her face but in her spirit. Her eyes carried warmth, and her laughter could chase away the day's tiredness. She helped the old and cared for the sick. Children followed her when she walked to the market because she always had sweets in her basket for them. Everyone loved her, and wherever she went, the air seemed to fill with joy. But Bako did not like how people looked at her, even with pure eyes. He began to notice the way men smiled politely when Lela greeted them at the well. He saw the admiration in their faces when she sang during the harvest celebrations. At first he said nothing, but slowly, a dark feeling began to grow inside him, the feeling of fear. Every night, while the crickets sang outside, Bako would lie awake and imagine men trying to steal his wife's attention. He began to ask her questions about where she went, who she spoke to, and what she said. "Why were you smiling at that man?" he would ask. "Why did you stay so long at the market?" Lela would explain gently, "He only asked for the price of cassava," or, "The trader gave me the wrong change." But no matter how soft her voice was, Bako's heart did not find peace. Over time he stopped believing her. His thoughts became like restless birds, flying in every direction. He told himself that the world was full of men who could not be trusted, and he convinced himself that if he did not act soon, he would lose what he loved most. So one morning when the sun had barely risen, he called the builders of the village. "I want a fence," he said firmly. "A tall one, strong enough that no one can see what happens inside." The builders looked surprised but obeyed. Day after day the sound of hammers and saws filled the air. People stopped and whispered as they passed. "What is Bako building?" one woman asked. "A fence," another replied. "He wants to hide his wife from the world." The elders shook their heads. "A fence can keep people out," they said, "but it can also keep love from breathing." When the fence was finished, it was so high that even the tallest man could not see over it. The once open yard that had been full of laughter now stood silent. The children who used to visit stopped coming. The neighbors no longer called out greetings. The house became quiet, too quiet. Lela tried to stay cheerful. She cooked his favorite meals, sang softly while she worked, and smiled when he came home. But her heart was growing heavy. The world beyond the fence had been full of light and sound, and now, all she could see was the wooden wall that surrounded her. She could hear the voices of other women fetching water, the laughter of children playing, and sometimes the rhythm of drums in the distance. But she could not join them. At night, when Bako came home, he would look around suspiciously. "Did anyone come while I was away?" he would ask. "No one," Lela would reply. "Are you sure?" "Yes, my husband." And then he would nod, pretending to be satisfied, though his heart still burned with doubt. Lela began to speak less. Her songs faded, and her laughter disappeared. She spent her days tending to the small garden behind the house and feeding the chickens. Sometimes she would stand near the fence and place her hand on it, feeling its rough surface beneath her fingers. It felt cold and hard, just like the fear that lived in Bako's heart. The villagers noticed the change. They missed her laughter at the well and her kind smile at the market. Some said, "Poor Lela. She shines like the sun, but her light is trapped behind that fence." Others shook their heads and said, "Bako has locked his own heart away. Love cannot live in a cage." One evening, as the sky turned orange and the wind blew gently, Lela sat by the window looking at the stars. She remembered how, before the fence, she and Bako used to sit outside together. They would tell stories, laugh, and watch fireflies. Back then, his eyes were full of warmth. Now, when he looked at her, she saw only fear and doubt. She whispered to herself, "He loves me, but he does not trust love." Her words were soft, almost carried away by the wind. Bako, sitting in the next room, heard her singing faintly. It was the same song she used to sing when they were happy. For a moment, he felt guilt rise in his chest, but his pride kept him silent. That night, he dreamed that he was walking through a dark forest. He could hear Lela's voice calling to him, but every time he tried to reach her, the fence appeared, blocking his way. He shouted her name, but his voice made no sound. When he woke up, sweat covered his forehead. He looked around the room, everything was silent. Lela was sleeping peacefully beside him, her face calm and gentle. For a long moment, he watched her and wondered what it would feel like to live without fear. Morning came again, and the village woke with songs of birds and the smell of cooking fires. Bako went outside and touched the fence. The wood was rough and strong just as he had wanted. Yet as he stood there he felt something strange, he felt lonely. He realized that even though he had built the fence to keep others away from his wife, it also kept him away from the world. The laughter of the children outside sounded distant. The greetings of his neighbors were no longer heard. The fence had not only trapped Lela, it had trapped him too. Still, his pride whispered, "You did what is right." But somewhere deep inside, another voice whispered, "Love cannot breathe behind walls." The day passed slowly. Lela brought him food and spoke softly, but her eyes no longer sparkled. The light that once filled their home had dimmed, replaced by silence and distance. That night, as Bako lay in bed, he could not sleep. He turned and looked at Lela again. She was sleeping with her face turned toward the window, where the moonlight touched her gently. He realized, with a pain he could not describe, that the woman he loved was fading away, not because another man had taken her, but because he had taken her freedom. And for the first time Bako began to understand that love, when caged, becomes weaker. He turned toward the window, looked at the moon and whispered softly, "Maybe I have locked more than a fence. Maybe I have locked my own heart." Outside, the wind blew gently against the wooden walls as if reminding him that nothing, not even love, can live without air. Days passed quietly in the fenced house of Bako and Lela. The mornings began the same way, with the sound of roosters crowing and the smell of porridge cooking. But the joy that once filled the air was gone. Lela moved slowly through her days, her laughter replaced by silence. She used to sing while grinding maize or sweeping the yard, her voice bright like the morning sun. Now her songs had turned soft and sad, floating through the air like whispers of a forgotten dream. The fence stood tall and firm, guarding the house like a wall of fear. From where she sat, Lela could see only a small piece of the sky and the tops of palm trees swaying in the wind. The world outside, the market, the laughter of children, the voices of women chatting at the well, all felt far away like memories from another life. She missed the sound of the river, the color of the sunset, and the feeling of walking freely through the village paths. Her only companion was Asha, a young servant girl who worked in the house. Asha was cheerful, full of energy, and always tried to make Lela smile. She brought her food, fetched water, and helped with chores. Sometimes, when Bako was away, they would sit together under the big mango tree in the corner of the yard, one of the few places where the sunlight fell freely. Asha often told Lela stories she heard from the market. She spoke of new traders who came to the village, of children's games, and of festivals that lit up the night. Lela listened quietly, her eyes soft with longing. "You are lucky, Asha," she said once. "You see the world every day. You walk freely under the open sky." Asha looked at her sadly. "But Mama," she said gently, "your heart is still free. The fence cannot keep your thoughts locked." Lela smiled faintly. "Maybe," she replied, "but sometimes it feels like even my thoughts have grown small, just like this yard." She would sit under that mango tree for hours, talking softly to herself. Sometimes she asked questions that had no answers. "Does love mean to hide or to trust?" she whispered one afternoon, tracing shapes in the dirt with a stick. "Can love breathe if it is trapped?" The wind rustled the leaves above her, as if the tree itself was listening. Bako, meanwhile, spent most of his time at work or watching the fence. His fear had not left him, if anything, it had grown. He checked the gates every morning and evening, making sure the locks were tight. He warned Asha never to speak to strangers or open the door without his permission. Even when Lela tried to speak kindly to him, his answers were short. His mind was filled with worry that someone, somehow, might take his wife away. The villagers noticed how Bako had changed. He no longer came to gatherings or joined the men in evening talks. He stopped laughing and even his voice grew hard. "The man is eating his own peace," the elders said. "Jealousy is a fire that burns its owner first." One evening heavy clouds gathered over Kijana. The sky turned gray, and the air became thick with the smell of rain. The wind began to howl, bending the trees and shaking the fence. Lela watched from her window as thunder rolled across the hills. Soon rain came pouring down, hitting the roof like a drum. Asha rushed inside, her hair dripping wet. "Mama Lela, the storm is strong. The fence might not hold." Lela stood by the window, her eyes wide. "Let it rain," she said softly. "Maybe the sky wants to speak tonight." Then a loud crash echoed through the yard, part of the fence had fallen. The wood split and the wind howled through the opening. Bako ran outside in panic, shouting for help. Asha, bring the rope. The fence is breaking. He tried to hold the pieces together, but the wind was too strong. His heart pounded with fear, not for the fence itself but for what it meant. To him, the broken fence was danger, a hole through which the world could enter and steal what was his. As lightning flashed, a figure appeared on the road, a traveler passing by, soaked from the rain. He saw Bako struggling and ran to help. Together, they lifted the heavy wood and tied it in place until the storm calmed. When it was over, Bako stood breathing hard, his clothes covered in mud. The traveler smiled gently and said, "You build strong walls, my friend. But remember, a fence can keep people out, yes, but it can also keep joy away." Bako stared at him, unsure how to respond. The traveler only nodded and walked away into the rain, his footsteps fading down the path. Lela had watched everything from the window. Those words, "A fence can keep joy away," echoed in her heart long after the traveler was gone. She sat quietly thinking about them. For the first time in a long while, she felt something stir inside her, a small flame of hope or maybe courage. Later that night, when the rain had stopped, she went outside. The air was cool and clean. The broken part of the fence was now tied together with rope, but through the small cracks she could see the road and the moonlight shining on wet grass. It was a small glimpse of freedom, but it was enough to make her smile. Asha joined her and said softly, "Mama, maybe this is a sign. Maybe the wind wanted to remind you that the world is still there." Lela nodded. "Yes," she said quietly. "And maybe the world is waiting for me." She touched the wood gently, feeling the rough edges of the broken fence. It no longer felt like a prison, it felt like a message. A reminder that even strong walls can fall when the wind is brave enough. Inside the house, Bako sat alone, replaying the traveler's words in his mind. For the first time they made him uneasy. He looked at his wife standing under the moonlight, and for a moment he saw how peaceful she looked. More peaceful than she had been in a long time. Something inside him began to shift, but his pride kept him silent. The night was calm again. The rain had washed the dust from the earth and the air smelled fresh. Lela looked up at the stars and whispered, "Maybe the fence will break again, but next time it won't frighten me." And though the walls still stood around her, her heart no longer felt completely trapped. She held the traveler's words close, like a secret treasure. Because deep inside she knew that the storm had brought more than rain, it had brought a promise of change. The days after the storm passed slowly, and the air in Bako's house grew heavy again. Though the rain had washed away the dust, it had not washed away the fear in his heart. If anything, it had made it stronger. The broken fence had frightened him, not because of the damage but because of what it meant. To him, it felt like the world outside was trying to come in. Bako became more watchful than before. He began following Lela's every step. When she walked to the garden, his eyes followed. When she spoke with Asha, he listened from a distance. If she smiled even slightly, he asked, "Why are you smiling? What are you thinking?" Lela stayed quiet. She had learned that her silence was safer than her words. But deep inside, her heart felt tired. Tired of being watched, tired of being doubted, tired of being treated like a secret. She loved her husband once for his strong will and warm laugh, but now both had been buried under fear. The villagers had started to whisper more often. Some said Bako had gone mad with jealousy. Others said he had lost the blessing of peace. The children no longer came near his house to play, even the birds seemed to fly over the fence, never landing inside. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, a calm figure appeared on the road. It was Elder Nuru, one of the most respected men in the village. He walked slowly, carrying a wooden staff, his gray beard glowing softly in the orange light. When he reached Bako's gate, he knocked gently. Bako opened the door, surprised. "Elder Nuru," he said, bowing his head. "Please come in." The old man stepped inside, looking around. His eyes studied the high fence, the quiet yard, and the sadness that hung in the air. He greeted Lela kindly and sat under the mango tree where she used to sit during the day. For a long moment, no one spoke. The sound of evening birds filled the silence. Finally, Nuru said, "Bako, I have come because I hear the wind whisper about your fence." Bako frowned. "The wind?" "Yes," Nuru said softly. "The wind carries the voices of those who build walls around their hearts. It told me you have locked away your wife." Bako stiffened. "I have done it to protect her. I only wish to keep what is mine safe. The world outside is full of men who stare too long and women who listen too easily. I cannot let that destroy my peace." Nuru smiled gently. "Your peace?" he asked. Tell me, my son, do you truly have peace now? Bako did not answer. His hands clenched on his knees. The elder leaned forward, his eyes kind but firm. You have locked your wife away, yes. But can you lock away your thoughts? Can you stop the wind from touching her face? Can you stop her heart from beating freely inside her chest? Bako's lips tightened. I only wish to protect what is mine, he repeated quietly. Nuru shook his head slowly. No, my son. You do not protect what is yours, you control what you do not trust. Love that fears to breathe is not love at all. It is a cage. Lela listened from the doorway, her hands pressed together. The words touched her heart like sunlight breaking through clouds. The elder continued, a jealous man builds walls around his fear, not around his love. You think you are guarding her, but truly you are guarding your own pain. You fear losing her because you have already lost faith in her heart. But trust, Bako. Trust is the true wall that keeps love safe. Bako looked down. His chest felt tight and his throat burned. He wanted to argue, but the words would not come. Elder Nuru rose slowly. You are a good man, he said softly. But good men too can be lost in their own shadows. Think about what I have said. Sometimes, the walls we build to keep others out become the same walls that keep us from seeing the light. Then he turned and left, his figure fading into the dim glow of the evening. That night the house was quiet. The moonlight slipped through the small cracks in the fence and painted pale lines across the floor. Bako lay in bed beside Lela, but his mind was not at rest. He turned from side to side, unable to sleep. When he finally drifted into dreams, he found himself standing inside a dark yard surrounded by tall wooden walls. The fence seemed endless, stretching higher than the trees. He called out, Lela? Lela? His voice echoed, but no answer came. He searched for the gate, but there was none. The more he ran, the smaller the yard became until he could barely move. Then he heard her voice, soft, distant, calling his name, but he couldn't see her. The wind blew hard and the fence closed tighter, trapping him in darkness. He screamed for help, but his own voice bounced back at him, empty and cold. When he woke, his body was covered in sweat. His heart pounded fast. Lela was still asleep beside him, peaceful as the dawn. Bako sat up and pressed his hands against his face. For the first time he saw his fear clearly. It was not protecting him, it was trapping him. The fence he built for his wife was the same fence that had grown inside his own mind. He rose from bed and went outside. The night was cool and the stars were bright above the quiet village. The wind moved gently through the cracks in the fence, whispering softly like Nuru's voice. He walked along the fence, touching the rough wood. Every board seemed to carry a memory, of anger, of doubt, of fear. He realized that the fence was not just made of wood, it was made of everything he refused to let go. He stood there for a long time, staring at the gate. For the first time he felt small, smaller than his own walls. When he returned to bed, he looked at Lela and saw something he had forgotten. Her calm, her patience, her quiet strength. She had never shouted, never cursed, never tried to escape. She had only waited. A soft pain filled his chest, not of anger but of shame. He whispered almost to himself, I built this fence because I feared losing her. But maybe I've already lost her by building it. The words hung in the air, quiet but true. As the night faded and the first light of morning touched the sky, Bako finally closed his eyes. His sleep was light, but his dreams were different. No walls, no gates, only an open field and the sound of the wind moving free. Somewhere deep inside, a small part of his heart began to open, just enough for light to enter. The morning sun rose gently over the village of Kijana, washing the earth in a soft, golden light. Birds sang from the trees, and the air smelled fresh after the night's cool wind. Inside the yard, Lela moved quietly between the flowers, a clay pot in her hands. She poured water over the small plants with care, her fingers brushing the leaves as if they were living friends. Bako stood by the doorway watching her silently. Her movements were calm and graceful, and even though she had lived behind those walls for so long, her spirit still seemed kind and gentle. He could see how she smiled at the flowers, how her eyes softened when the butterflies landed near her. It struck him how someone so full of light could have stayed patient for so long in such a small, closed world. For a moment he wondered what she thought of him now. Did she hate him? Did she pity him? Or had she simply stopped feeling anything at all? The thought made his chest tighten. Asha appeared from behind the house, carrying a small basket of fruit. She looked at Bako nervously before speaking in a low voice. She never speaks against you, Baba, she said. When she prays, she asks only for peace in your heart. Bako turned to her, surprised. She prays for me? Asha nodded. Every night. She says, may his heart find light again. The words struck him like a sudden wind, soft but strong. For a long moment he said nothing. His eyes followed Lela as she continued watering the plants, humming quietly to herself. There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness, only peace. Something inside him began to tremble. He felt shame rise in his chest, followed by a strange sadness he couldn't name. He walked away from the doorway and went to sit under the old mango tree, the one that had stood there long before the fence. It was the same tree where Lela used to sit and stare at the sky. He looked at the fence, tall, thick and proud just as he had built it. But now, instead of safety, it looked like a shadow that had swallowed the light of his home. The wood seemed darker than before, the nails rough and cold. He could almost hear the echo of Elder Nuru's voice in the wind. A jealous man builds walls around his fear, not around his love. The wind began to move gently through the branches above him. It carried the smell of wet earth and flowers, and then softly he heard it, Lela singing. At first, the sound was faint, almost hidden beneath the rustle of leaves. But then it grew clearer, a gentle, warm melody that floated through the yard. Her voice rose and fell like the breeze itself, calm and forgiving. She sang in her mother's old tongue, the words simple but full of life. The song slipped through the cracks in the fence and drifted out into the village. People working nearby stopped what they were doing. Women at the well lifted their heads, children paused their games, even the men in the fields turned to listen. It had been a long time since anyone had heard Lela's voice beyond the walls. Her song was not one of sorrow but of hope. It carried a strange power, not loud but deep. It spoke of love that could survive silence, of forgiveness that could soften even stone. Bako sat under the tree, his hands trembling slightly. Each note seemed to touch something hidden inside him, something he had locked away with his fears. The longer she sang, the more he felt the weight pressing on his heart begin to lift. He remembered their early days together before jealousy had poisoned his thoughts. He remembered how they had danced by the river after their wedding, how her laughter had made him feel young and free. He remembered how she used to place flowers in his hair, teasing him that he looked like a king. Where had all that gone? He looked again at the fence, his creation, his pride, his prison. The wind blew harder now, shaking the wooden boards. For the first time he didn't feel the urge to protect it. Instead he felt the need to breathe. Slowly Bako stood up. His legs felt heavy but his steps were steady. He walked to the gate, the same gate he had locked so many times, and placed his hand on it. The wood was warm under his fingers, the iron latch cold. He hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and pulled it open. The hinges creaked, the sound sharp in the still morning air. Beyond the gate lay the open road, bright and endless. The sunlight poured through the gap like water, washing over the yard. Bako stood there, his chest rising and falling. He didn't fully understand why he was doing it, but he knew it felt right. The moment the gate opened, he felt a weight fall from his shoulders, a heavy burden that had sat there for years. The air that rushed in felt cleaner, lighter, alive. He turned to look at Lela. She had stopped singing and was standing by the flowers, watching him quietly. Her eyes were soft, curious but not afraid. She didn't speak and neither did he. Then a soft smile spread across her face, not wide, not bright, but peaceful like the calm after rain. The villagers who had stopped to listen from afar saw the open gate and began whispering among themselves. Some smiled, others nodded knowingly. Asha came running, her eyes wide. Baba, you opened it? Bako nodded slowly. Yes, child. I opened it. He looked around the yard, the flowers, the trees, the sunlight. Everything seemed different, though nothing had really changed. The world looked clearer, warmer, more beautiful than it ever had. For years he had tried to keep the world out, but now he saw that it was not the world that needed guarding, it was his own heart that needed freeing. The wind brushed past him again, carrying with it the faint echo of Lela's song. It rose above the trees, dancing through the air, reaching beyond the fence that was no longer closed. For the first time in many years Bako smiled, a true quiet smile. He sat back under the mango tree, letting the wind play with his hair. The sound of life beyond the gate filled his ears, laughter, footsteps, distant drums. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, maybe the wind was never my enemy. Maybe it only wanted to remind me that love cannot live without air. And for the first time the world, his world, felt beautiful again. The morning came with a brightness that seemed new, as if the sun itself had chosen to shine differently on that day. The air was cool and clean, and the village of Kijana buzzed with gentle excitement. Birds hopped along the rooftops, children laughed near the well, and the smell of roasted maize drifted through the air. It was a special day, Lella's birthday. Inside the once quiet yard things were different now. The gate that had once been locked tight stood open, and the wind moved freely through the space, carrying the scent of flowers that had begun to bloom along the fence line. The walls still stood, but they no longer felt like barriers. Instead, they looked softer, touched by sunlight, alive with color. Lella sat near the garden, her hands resting on her lap, smiling at the guests who had come to celebrate. Her laughter, once hidden behind silence, now filled the air like music. She looked peaceful, her eyes glowing with the calm of someone who had found freedom without running away. Baco sat beside her, quieter than usual. His face had changed, still strong but softer now, calmer. The anger and suspicion that once darkened his eyes were gone. He looked at his wife, and for the first time he saw her not as something to guard, but as someone to cherish. He took her hands gently and said in a low voice, "Lella, I built those walls because I was afraid of losing you. But in doing that I almost lost your joy, and that is worse than losing anything else." Lella smiled, her eyes warm. "Love cannot live behind walls, Baco," she said softly. "It needs the open sky to breathe." Her words touched him deeply. For a moment he could not speak. He only nodded, his heart full. Around them, the villagers clapped their hands, sang songs, and shared food. Even the children ran freely in and out of the open gate, chasing each other through the flowers. The air was full of laughter, the kind that carried peace instead of pride. Later in the day, as the sun began to lower in the sky, Baco stood and looked at the fence once more. The same fence that had once made him feel powerful now looked small to him, just pieces of wood that had stolen years of his happiness. He picked up an axe and called to a few men from the village. "Come, my friends," he said. "Help me take this down. I want to build something better." The men smiled, and together they began to work. One by one the boards came down. Dust rose in the air, and the sound of wood falling echoed through the village. People gathered to watch. Some cheered, some clapped, and some simply smiled. Lella stood nearby, her eyes bright with quiet pride. When the last board fell, the view from their yard opened wide. The fields, the trees, the hills beyond. The same land that had always been there now looked endless and beautiful. Baco wiped the sweat from his brow and looked at Lella. "Now the wind can come and go as it pleases," he said. "And so can joy," she replied. In place of the walls, Baco planted flowers, bright red hibiscus, golden marigolds, and white lilies that smelled sweet in the evening air. He worked every morning, watering them with care. Soon the garden became the most beautiful in the village. People came to visit often, not because of curiosity anymore, but because they loved the peace that surrounded that home. The laughter that once died inside those walls now spilled out freely into the streets. Neighbors stopped by to share meals, children played under the mango tree, and Lella's songs became a part of every sunrise. Even Elder Nuru visited often. He would sit under the tree with Baco and sip tea. One afternoon, as the breeze moved softly through the garden, he looked around and smiled. "The jealous man has learned that trust is the true guard of love," he said quietly. Baco nodded, humbled. "Yes, Elder," he replied. "I once thought love was something to hold tightly, but now I know it grows stronger when you let it breathe." Elder Nuru chuckled. "The wind teaches many lessons, my son. You only had to open your door to hear it." Time passed and seasons changed. The story of Baco and Lella spread beyond Kijana. People from other villages spoke of the man who had once locked his wife behind walls but later tore those walls down with his own hands. They said he learned that jealousy is not love, and that trust is the seed from which love grows. Years later, when Baco and Lella had grown old, their garden was still full of life. Children ran through it, chasing butterflies, and the air always smelled of flowers. The gate remained open always. Lella would sit in her favorite chair under the mango tree, her hair silver now, her face calm and wise. Baco would sit beside her, his hand resting gently on hers. Sometimes young couples came to ask for their blessing. They would say, "Tell us, Baba Baco, how did you and Mama Lella keep your love so strong?" Baco would smile softly and point toward the open gate. "By never closing that," he would say. "When I locked it, I locked my heart. When I opened it, I found peace." And Lella would add, "Love is like the wind, you cannot hold it, but you can feel it everywhere if you let it in." The villagers often ended their own stories with a saying born from the tale of the two. Jealousy builds prisons, but trust builds homes. Even after Baco and Lella passed on, their home remained a place of joy. The mango tree still gave shade, the flowers still bloomed, and the wind still moved freely through the open space. Travelers who came to Kijana would often stop by that house, sit for a while and say they could still feel the peace in the air. And every time the wind passed through that garden, it carried a whisper, a soft reminder of the love that had once learned to breathe again.